If you're a new DM, this video will save you a lot of painful learning. If you've been around the screen for a while, then you probably have war stories that could help other new DMs, and who knows, there may be a nugget of wisdom hidden in here somewhere for you to use. I know, I used the word wisdom. Stick around and together we'll sidestep these issues so gracefully that your rogue will be jealous as we dive into 7 common mistakes new DMs make and how to avoid them. One of my very first mistakes as a new dungeon master in my early tweens was to ask my players to roll their own ability scores. Now, I wasn't quite naive enough to think that my players could do so without oversight, and so I did watch each of my players make these rolls. But an overabundance of trust in my players was not the mistake that we're talking about today. Great rolls and crap rolls both lead to awesome stories and awesome characters. It's one of the things that makes it so appealing, the idea of randomizing these stats, that we might get a stat that's outside of what the other methods of generation are going to give us, something really, really high so that we can start off with an amazing attribute, or something really awful and low that is going to allow us a point to roleplay around and give us something to prompt us in our acting of our characters. But in truth, the biggest problem that comes from rolling ability scores is not only the imbalance to the game, especially in 5th edition, which is so tightly bound in accuracy that it tries to solve all of those other problems that come from randomized stats, but also the imbalance that comes between our different players. One of them whose highest stat is a 14, and the other one who didn't seem able to roll below a 14 on 4d6 drop 1. When you're just starting out as a new dungeon master, I highly recommend that you tell your players to use the standard array. Even point buy, though it does keep imbalance to a minimum, allows a wide variance between characters in terms of optimization and power, and it can create those imbalances at the table, which can be hard as a new dungeon master to know how to offset in play. My terrible experience ended up with me sitting down, playing 2nd edition Dungeons & Dragons, and watching my friend roll a 100 on a D100 in order to get a starting stat of 19 strength in 2nd edition. What he had was an absolute wrecking house of a character. I watched the rest of my friends roll their fairly average and normal characters, and of course we went on into the dungeon without a care in the world. The rest of the party watched on in awe and, yes, shall I say it, complete and utter boredom, as my solitary friend waded through the dungeon, enjoying himself immensely, and I kept scrambling, wondering what I had done wrong that all of my friends were ready to go home so darn soon. Have any of you ever experienced an overpowered character that overshadowed the other characters, or perhaps even your entire game? What did you do about it? Hi, baby. Yeah, I love you too. The second mistake that new DMs make is to use too many books too soon. I understand the allure of using every book available and allowing every choice. It's something that I do at my own tables with very few restrictions so that my players can feel like they have loads of choices and can create whatever character they desire. It's a worthy goal and a great thing to aspire to, but it's a terrible way to start your career as a dungeon master. Restricting the choices that your players are able to make means that you are able to master the system of what they are doing, and you're able to better understand what kind of possibilities are going to be in play. Focus on the essentials and focus your players on those essentials by limiting them to the Player's Handbook. If you'd like, you can use the Adventurers League rules of Player's Handbook +1 alternative sourcebook so that you can track what each person is going to use, but I would really recommend Player's Handbook only for your first first campaign so that you can control the flow of information, and feel free to use all those other books yourself. Just keep the complication level to a minimum as much as possible. The third problem for new DMs I call the Manifesto Problem, which is essentially that a lot of people, when they first want to become a DM, they want to become a DM because they have an awesome idea. If you try to deliver it on your first time, a lot of the time that can lead to disappointment in how the story goes, burnout in trying to keep up with all of the requirements that you've placed before yourself, or just a plain failure to be able to deliver. Get some experience with content that is readily available before you go diving into your manifesto. Pull pieces from what you do into a document and start preparing for that great big campaign that you're going to one day deliver with all of the skills that you've gained from running simple one-shot adventures in order to gain experience with the mechanics of running a game as a dungeon master, or short campaigns that were published by Wizards of the Coast or third-party sources. Play with things for a little bit, gain some experience, build your manifesto into the homebrew that it really can be, instead of burning yourself out and burning that manifesto with your first attempt. Another common mistake the DMs make is in knowing where, how, and how much to read of the material that they're working with. It's really important that you know the essentials of how an adventure is going to go. Meanwhile, the exact details of every item in every room of the castle that you're going to be taking your characters to is probably not as important for you to focus upon. Skimming the book in its entirety can have danger if you're not going to then read the chapters that you are a part of, whereas diving deep into the nitty-gritty of things that aren't going to come up for many sessions is potentially not as useful a use of your time. My advice when running a published adventure is to give a general read to the entire adventure with a solid focus on the beginning that is telling you the adventure synopsis and lore that you should read through word for word at least once, and then you should skim through perhaps the entire adventure and then read from cover to cover the chapter that you're going to be running right now. If you're a fast reader and you can give the entire adventure one solid read, that's fine as long as you don't get bogged down into any of the details. But before you run any specific chapter, you should be reading that chapter again fresh. You don't have to read from the beginning of the book every time you try to acquaint yourself, but you do need to know what is going on right now and where it's supposed to lead. If that seems like too much information and you can't possibly read everything, then just read the chapter that you're working on and the adventure at the beginning, and you'll at least be able to figure out roughly where you're at. Don't let yourself get overwhelmed by the entirety of the material, and don't let yourself get bogged down in the details, and you'll do well. Speaking of details, one thing that people who get this far into a video often forget to do is to hit subscribe so that they can get more help later. Don't be that guy. The next mistake that DMs often make is the attempt to establish authority through perceived omniscience. That's really a big way of saying that you take the approach of my way or the highway with your table. There's a lot of advice out there about how the DM is always right, and it has roots in something that is relatively benign and friendly. The idea that you should trust your DM to make the call and to realize that the DM does have the potential power to break the rules in places where it's going to improve the game. However, it's kind of a toxic approach. I highly encourage new DMs to acknowledge the fact that they are fallible. In fact, every DM could probably do by listening to that message, including myself. One rule that has served me well is that when there is a question about rules, if I can't find a definitive answer to show somebody in 30 seconds or less, then I should just rule in the player's favor. If I'm wrong about that, they had a good time and I can fix further similar instances in the future. We have to learn the rules as well as we can so that we know when it is good to break the rules, and so that when we do break those rules, we can have our players trust that they understand that we are doing so knowingly and with some kind of intent to improve the game instead of simply looking to establish our authority. Remember that this is a game that you're supposed to be playing with your friends, not your enemies. The next mistake the DMs often make is that they forget to write things down, and then they forget. We would all love to think that we have infallible memories, but the sheer number of things that a DM has to manage on a nightly basis is honestly pretty mind-boggling. So make sure that you're on the lookout for items to write down that would be important for you to make sure that they get down on paper. Sometimes that includes things that are repeatedly asked for at the table, and as a tip, that'll improve your game flow if you write down things like the armor classes and the perception skills of your characters. But also, it's important to remember to write down things for me like the name that you just came up with out of nowhere, the arcane babble that you decided was the command word for that cool wand of fireballs that the party found, how many days have passed during travel, and how much money you've doled out or how much something might be worth that has been found by your group. It's easy enough to use a quick pad of paper in order to jot these things down, or a text file on your computer, or the awesome campaign logger put out by John 4, which allows you to organize your materials and search through them later so that you don't lose a thing. Finally, the last mistake that new DMs really commonly make is to mistake what the DM's goal is. Because the DM's goal is not to win Dungeons and Dragons. And it's not to win in any encounter. And it's not to win in any discussion or in any role-played environment. The DM's goal is to accurately represent their world the best that they can and to provide a shared world crafted experience that the players can enjoy along with the DM. The rewards of running a game when you're a friend to the players and excited by their successes are innumerable. If you've ever seen a DM who is just laid back and bored at their game, rolling the dice, and the only fun they have is when they are finding some kind of success, that's a DM who is missing out on such an awesome opportunity to become a fan of their players and to be excited by the players' successes. The game is literally designed so that the players are going to be the ones who win in almost every encounter. Anytime that you encounter a total party kill, that's a situation where the DM should hopefully go home feeling like they made a mistake instead of feeling like they finally succeeded. The biggest mistake that you can make at the beginning of your career is to think that your creatures and monsters and plots are the star of the show. Make the characters the heroes. Have any of you ever had a DM who was adversarial and clearly out to win? I'd love to talk to you about your experience for a potential future video, so drop a comment below and I'll be sure to credit any of you who I quote. The 8th bonus tip mistake that DMs make is to believe that they're not going to make any mistakes. No matter how many videos we watch, no matter how well we prepare, no matter how many years we've been doing this for, or how many games we run a year, we're going to make mistakes at the table, and that's okay.